Thank you. Okay, so I actually have just hit record. I forgot to hit record for your introduction, so I'll put little introductions on the subtitles when I save this up to my website later. But thank you again for your introduction. So first of all, let's start talking about, I think that before we do anything else, we should probably define what the heck a digital nomad visa even is. I find myself in my middle age feeling kind of irritated by the name of it, honestly, and by the whole concept of a so-called digital nomad. But I think it is really a real thing. So I'm going to go around you guys and ask you what you think of it, one by one, actually, before we start talking any specifics. So in just like a sentence, Karma, you go first. Tell me what the heck is a digital nomad visa, and who is it for? And is it a real thing?
Yes, I believe it's a real thing. However, there's lots of questions to be answered. Portugal is very interested in attracting digital nomads, and I think it may develop into something very real. So, yes.
Okay, that's good enough for me. Yeah, that's a good summary. Carolina, how about you? What do you think? What is a digital nomad visa, and is it
a digital nomad is a person that wants to work in another place, doesn't have an interest to stay in his home country, but travel around the world. And in the Caribbean is possible, not yet in the Latin American region, but in the Caribbean, people can just be working from an island like Antigua and Barbuda or the Bahamas and just spend 1 year enjoying the weather. So it's really possible, and it's happening at this moment as we speak.
Thank you. Judith, what's a digital nomad visa? Does it exist in South Africa yet? Tell us that also.
Not yet. We started or kicked off the discussion around it, but it's not existing yet. Obviously, it's a great opportunity to explore a country for a longer period of time. It's existing. It's a lot of discussion around it, and yeah, I think it's two different types. It's like people like maybe want to explore a country for a longer term. A longer term, I'm not necessarily mean 12 months, maybe even longer. Maybe being employed overseas, so like on an employment contract, and then we have the other group, I think, like, which are really the freelancers, which a lot of us having in mind of like traveling around from places to places for short periods. So I think we need to look for a visa option covering those aspects.
Yeah, exactly. Philip, tell us about the digital nomad visa in the UAE. You know it's a real thing, right? Because for you,
yeah, over here now, the form they have, they call it a remote worker visa, but there's certainly many digital nomads here. We believe Dubai is a fancy city, and you find all these social media influencers, for one, certainly, who may be leading that life. I think it's a little like Carolina said, is having the dream of sitting at the beach and doing your work and being able to tap into funding for it at the same time. It's not for everyone, but there's certainly more and more people capturing that part of the digital world and of a lifestyle maybe as well.
Yeah. And then Clayton, from your point of view, what is it?
Sure.
What is this?
So the U.S. has plenty of digital nomads, but of course, no digital nomad visa. And so when you were talking about working with nice scenery, all I thought, my mind carried me to Ernest Hemingway, a century ago when he wrote his novels in Cuba and Key West, right? And so, there's been nomadic work for quite a long time, and then digital nomads since the dawn of the internet age, or maybe in the facsimile age. And now we have this mechanism in place here. There's not one in the United States, though there are other mechanisms under U.S. immigration law where certain activities can be done in the U.S. as long as they don't rise to the level of work under our visa waiver program and certainly our B1, but they're very restrictive.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're saying a digital nomad visa is a visa for people who want to travel around, do their work from wherever the heck they want to do it from, looking out the window at a lovely scenery with their laptop their desk. So in reality, I don't think there are that many real digital nomad visas that exist. I've been trying to do a bit of research. I've got my little list here, and thank you guys for helping me with it as well. So the list of countries that I've got that have existing digital nomad visas are as follows. So I've got Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Bahamas, Bermuda, which sounds like the beginning of a song. Croatia, Curacao, Estonia, was one of the first, I think. Georgia has something in the works. Greece has something in the works, doesn't really exist yet. Iceland, Malta, Montserrat, Montenegro, Romania, and of course the UAE. And then I've got another list of 5 countries, which I think are interesting, 2 of which are being represented today. So Costa Rica, Italy, Portugal, and South Africa, and Thailand. And apparently these 5 countries are considering digital nomad visas and are keen to get something up and running and in place. So I thought maybe should we start with one of these keen to get something up and running. Judith, do you want to tell us what is going on in South Africa? So there's not a digital nomad visa yet, but there might be one, and also tell us why there should be one, maybe.
Yes, we don't have a digital nomad visa yet. We have visas for certain occupations like journalists, artists, and people working in the moving industry who are on foreign contracts coming to South Africa. So you could maybe frame it under digital nomad remote working visa, but it's specified for certain people. Having the pandemic and facing economic challenges, particularly the Western Cape started the discussion of promoting the need of a digital nomad visa. Firstly, or to boost the tourism, but there's other things we can look around and can have a look and actually find reasons why to motivate to have it. As an example, in South Africa, we don't have a visa for spouses of experts to work, which is a huge problem because it's affecting attracting of foreign talent in the country. So the visa could maybe a gap, or could be helped to close this gap what we have in existing legislation. Obviously, we can attract investment. So we do have examples not of digital nomads, but of returning South Africans coming back to the country, telling their huge big employers overseas, I want to return. They founded a company in South Africa. And yeah, one of the examples, they are now one of the biggest employer, at least in the Western Cape. So there are different aspects to this whole thing. As I said, the good thing about South Africa is the government is in a way approachable, if that makes sense. So if you come up with a good case, there are chances to convince them. And also the Department of Home Affairs is currently looking from a broader perspective into how immigration to South Africa should look like in the next years. So we're expecting a new paper, green paper on migration soon. And these papers are open for public comment. So it's normal that if the public is involved in the legislation process, which is good. So you can provide feedback to the government and actually look into it. So let's see where we're going. It's just started, but there are a lot of discussion happening about this.
And you know what I think is really interesting about it? So I think although I was talking about being middle-aged and annoyed by the term digital nomad, I also think it's super exciting. I think it's really exciting to have the opportunity to be at the forefront of something that's quite new, and also at a time when it's so easy to communicate and collaborate with one another, so even right now on this call now, we have 6 people here who have so much knowledge between them. Actually, I'm going to say 5 people have a lot of knowledge. One of the people is just listening to everybody else and talking too much. But, people who have so much knowledge about their own countries, and that can be used to inform your personal discussions with the authorities in Cape Town or the Western Cape or wherever, you're trying to encourage them to set something up, I think that's...
Yes, exactly. Cool. So I think the challenge right now, it's a little bit of data. So obviously, if we could forward and say okay, so if we're implementing, we can expect I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of applications. That's on our benefit for the country. So working backwards of like, this is the benefits, and why should we do it? One thing of like maybe needed, but it's also like we need to look at the bigger picture. So what is the country gaining from if we're doing it? Is it revenue? Is it tax? Is it whatever? So I think we need to look at it in perspective. Unfortunately, data is missing, and I'm pointing towards Philip because he has data on the UAE, but I found quite interesting last time because it's actually a visa which, yeah, people waiting and looking for, because it looks or like it seems like to be working in the UAE.
So let's talk about the UAE then, Philip. Let's go from a country which has got a sort of aspirational digital nomad visa, like some plans, to one that definitely has some real visas which people are actually really getting in real life. How does it all work, and who's it for?
Yeah, how does it work? I think it's like Judith said, it's important to look at what is a company, or not a company, a country here looking behind it and looking to get out of it. And I think for the UAE and Dubai in this case, it is very important to build, it's a young country and economy and nation. It's important to build the knowledge economy, and the digital nomad approach, so to say, is also a call for talent, and I think it can be seen as a tool for the country to attract foreign talent into this market. So Dubai has a very high-end infrastructure, so it has a lot to give. But it's also, this is built in the desert, and wheels need to be greased. It constantly needs tenants and consumers of services. So the UAE are attracting talent and also consumers at the same time. And the form of visa we have with this remote work visa is maybe just such a thing. It's a tool to provide people an opportunity, but also to attract them to the country and to allow them to get a first feeling for the country. And maybe just for an international audience, if I recap a bit on employment opportunities. So for the UAE, we have about 10 million people living here, and you have a good 80 to 90% of them being expatriates, so that it will come down to 7 to 8 million maybe. All these expatriates need a visa for the UAE, of course, and the traditional way to obtain that visa is to have a sponsoring company to host it. So if you're not employed, you're not getting an employment visa, obviously, but to be employed, you need a registered entity in the UAE to host that visa. So this is a traditional way. So those 7 to 8 million expatriates living in the UAE, they have that kind of a visa. Now, the remote work visa is different in the sense that it is actually sponsored and hosted by the Dubai government. So everybody else will have most likely a private company entity sponsoring it, while the remote work visa is sponsored by the Dubai government. So it allows an applicant to basically apply for this visa personally, and he does not need his company involved for this. The visa requires evidence, however, for employment contracts, or if you're not an employee, evidence for being a company owner yourself, an entrepreneur. And you also need to provide evidence of a constant income of at least $5,000 per month. So the evidence you need to provide to obtain this visa has to prove and certify that element. So an employment contract is required if you're an employee for at least a year. And 3 months of bank statements are also required to demonstrate the income you're having. If you're self-employed, you need to prove those numbers as well on average over a year. So it's fairly scrutinized, but an applicant basically applies online, so that process is simple, and that's in the sense of what we understand from it as a digital consumer as well. It's an easy application process, but then there's a screening period of what I hear of up to a month, where your data is verified, and then the Dubai government extends this this kind of a visa. The visa allows all sorts of opportunities. So once you have it, you are also entitled to sponsor your family and dependents. And the visa is valid for a year. It automatically expires after a year's period, and you then have the option to either apply again and run through the same process, or to simply leave the country. So this is maybe in a nutshell on how the visa works. And with, so I was mentioning the traditional way of getting a visa. So the difference is really that while in the past, a locally registered company would have to sponsor a visa, now an international company could send their employees over here, if they allow their employees, of course, to travel abroad. But the applicant would have to show reference that he is in fact employed and has a safe stream of revenue and of income.
I think it's really interesting. Yeah, because that is exactly how I have been thinking of it as well, because the previous options basically required you to have a sponsor and also to be paid some part of your salary, right? In the UAE, like, did you not have to pay? Did you have to be paid locally as well for the kind of traditional employment permit route?
Yeah, so there's two forms. We have the free zones in the UAE, where some of them also require you to locally pay your employees through the wages protection system.
Yeah.
And in the mainland, this is required. But there's also many visas from other free zones where you don't locally have to pay them. But you're right. So the remote worker visa, you can now be paid internationally. So only on this visa, while otherwise you probably have to start having UAE bank accounts.
Yeah, because somebody's asked, so this is an excellent question. Thank you for asking it. Somebody said, will this visa replace business visas in the Q&A? And to me, it's more likely to replace employment permits. It's more likely that previously, is that how you're seeing it? That previously employers would have had to move somebody onto local, or do whatever they needed to do to get the employment permit. But now, are employers actually taking advantage of the remote work visa to bring people over? Is that what? Sure, it's been really high take up, right? There's been, I mean, in my mind, it's been a high take up. Nearly 2,000 visas issued already under this category, right?
Yeah, and I think the benefits for these 2,000 people who applied so far, I think they get to experience the country in an easy way, so like without the further commitment to register a company. So that's really the advantage. I don't think it will replace an employment visa, so that system will continue to work in the UAE. Ultimately, the UAE want to attract companies and have everything registered locally and hosted locally. But I look at it more from a perspective that this visa helps to promote Dubai and to help source the kind of clientele that the UAE are looking for. So with this visa, you're screening the global market in a way. You're attracting the global market to come, provided that they bring sufficient income and evidence over a certain knowledge and know-how. So it's maybe more a promotional tool. It's good for people to try out the country, but in the long term, if you're really interested in being in the UAE, you probably will end up registering your own company here, or international companies would move to this market. But the 1 year period will probably help everyone, an employer, an international employer, and the employee locally to take that decision. Do I like the country? Is it the place I want to be in? So from that point of view, I think it's an excellent tool. Without a strong financial commitment, you're able to test the waters, so to say.
Yeah, I understand. I think my video stopped working. I hope you guys can still hear me okay.
We don't see you, no.
Yeah, well, never mind. Nobody needs to see my shiny little face. So that was, I think that's really, so Carolina, tell us about the Bahamas, because I feel like the digital nomad visas that we see popping up all over the place in the Caribbean are, they're still called digital. One of the things I think is so interesting about this is that although it's completely new, there's quite a lot of consistency, but there seem to me to be two main branches. There's the really work-based routes, and then there's the sort of freelancer lifestyle based. But anyway, tell us about the Bahamas.
Yes. So in the Bahamas, the Nomad visa is called Bahamas Extended Access Travel Stay, and everybody calls it BEATS. So it's a very simple process. The duration of stay will be 12 months, but it could be renewed for 3 years. So the main thing that the country is doing is trying to attract consumers, just the same way as Philip in Dubai. They're trying to attract people that come and visit, stay there for a year, and maybe buy a property later on, bring their families, and then be part of the community, create their own community in the islands. So it's the main purpose of it is to bring people, have them consume, get them acquainted with the islands, and maybe they'll stay longer or buy property there. You can bring your family, dependents, and also since there's no personal income tax payable in the island, you will have to process your taxes wherever you are, where your home country is. But there's no additional taxes to pay as income tax. There's higher taxes for consumer goods, but not for income tax. What is needed to apply is very simple. It's an online application. Within 5 working days, you'll have your visa approved or denied. It all depends on if you deliver the proper documentation. But the documentation needed is just have health insurance, proof of employment outside the Bahamas, and of course, no criminal records. But it's very easy to apply, and you will be able to stay for a full year. There's other countries like Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Bermuda, and they all have kind of similar, the same as Curacao, similar project. Some are a little bit more expensive than others, but it's basically the same concept. Applications fees, for example, for the Bahamas is just $25, and the permit fee is $1,000. The dependents are $500. And it's very similar in other countries. And a little bit like, for example, in Barbuda, if you come with your family, it's a bundle fee of $3,000. But you don't have to make a big deposit. Like, for example, you were talking about Costa Rica. They have a certain type of visa that's called the freelancer visa, or the, it's rentista. That's the name, rentista. But that's basically for entrepreneurs, and they cannot have they cannot work for another company. It's basically a freelancer. You have to deposit $60,000 in country and have a set income per month, but that's a different type of visa. The ones in the Caribbean are basically nomads. They're allowed to work there and live there, and some of them even call them resident visa.
This is the thing, right? So I feel like there's quite a lot of confusion. And certainly for me, I mean, I knew nothing about digital nomad visas because they didn't exist 5 minutes ago, it feels like, but when I was looking into it, I was like, oh, look, Costa Rica's got one, Italy's got one, Germany's got one, but they don't really, they have visas which are either for self-employed people or freelance people, or maybe you don't need an entity to sponsor. Germany has this route, which is very useful for some nationalities where you don't need an entity to sponsor you, and so that can be used. So there is a difference between a specific digital nomad visa, which is designed by a country to either encourage kind of digital entrepreneurship, startup tech type work, which it looks like, for example, the Estonia one is all about, or one designed to encourage people to come and live in the country because they've been suffering so badly from lack of tourism, which it seems like the Caribbean ones are about. But then on top of that, there's this phenomenon of people kind of self-identifying as digital nomads anyway, and making use of existing visa categories in order to pursue that lifestyle, which I think, so in Portugal, I thought Portugal was a really interesting example, because when I was Googling Portugal, this is the extent of my research, is like the big Google, I found out all about this special digital nomad village in Madeira. And I thought, brilliant, like there must be a special visa, but Carmo tells me that there isn't. So Carmo, tell us. And I muted you earlier rudely, so please unmute yourself. There you
go. Yes, you're absolutely right, Sophie. So we have a lot of digital nomads marketing, like for co-working, for renting houses, for provide services. But that doesn't mirror in the immigration scenario. At the moment, as you said, we have different types of digital visas, nomad visas, different conditions, and the Portuguese legislation meets every of them. So I don't see, I mean, maybe we will in the future have a digital nomad visa. However, at the moment, we have a specific visa for temporary stays for as a freelancer or as an assignment, or more than a year for to keep a local contract. Well, for local contract, or again for an assignment or freelance. So we have all the different visas that may also apply for digital nomads. But I think the government is very interesting in attracting this, well, like everybody was saying, attracting the talent, attracting the foreign investment, because when the digital nomads come, they in principle, if they stay more than 183 days, they will pay their tax, they will rent houses, they will spend money. So this will dynamize the economy, will have an impact on the economy. The government also refers, because I was very interesting publishing, it's called Green Book of Future Work, which was published now in June by the Portuguese government, that specifically refers digital nomads, and how the government is very interested in creating conditions to attract them. But again, there's many things that will need to be rethink and rethought, such as the social security policies, tax policies. For instance, social security, I think it's very interesting, and one of the main topics when we speak about digital nomads, tax and social security, in fact, because I see, and this is a very personal opinion, I see in the future that the digital nomads will be more to do with freelance situations rather than with local works, local contracts. For instance, you having a local contract, an employment contract in UK, and you coming to Portugal and you're doing remote work from Portugal, and you keep on with your employment contract in the UK. I think this situation brings many questions that are not yet have no answer. While the freelancers, for me, they are the true digital nomads. They'll go from country to country to provide services to different companies, and is there where the tax and social security policies need to be rethought, because freelancers usually do not have as extensive social protection as, for instance, employees. And therefore, I think that this will need to be reanalyzed. Yes. And the government refers these topics. So also the Portuguese government has invested a lot of time and efforts and money in making the country more digitalized. So the conditions, IT access, things like, for instance, also the tax benefits. So I think yes, there's a lot of interest in Portugal to attract this type of digital nomads. And I see the country, well, I see us developing something towards that.
So I also think, like, just from a basically from sort of marketing point of view. So there is a question here from Angela Gonzalez, thank you, Angela, about whether we think that creating a visa should be necessary to attract people, or is a normal traditional visa enough? And I think it's really interesting because, in the UAE, therefore, you have that situation where there wasn't really an assignment visa, right? It was, there was not it reminds me a bit of when the blue card came out, and it was such a hit and success in Germany because the previous local higher employment permit or visa wasn't that useful. It wasn't that attractive to companies. So it seems to me that there's a bit of a mixture here between, do you really need a digital nomad visa if you've already got a perfectly good temporary stay visa in Portugal, for example, that works perfectly fine. But maybe you need one anyway, so that you can say, we are a country that wants to attract digital nomads, and we have this special route, and we've also sorted out all of the tax and social security. Everything is cleaned out of the way for you, so you can just come straight in. Because more and more countries are basically marketing themselves to investors and entrepreneurs and people with high net worth, and now to individuals. But we should talk about tax. So we've all been going on about how great these visas might be, and I want to come and live in all of your countries and not in mine anymore. But what's the downside? Clayton, tell us what we're supposed to do about
Oh, wow. So, for years, I practiced with a senior lawyer, his prime answer, he made a career of saying no. So I'll try not to say no too many times here in the course of my little diatribe here. But I mean, I think here, there was a comment when I posted and shared this on LinkedIn about, or isn't digital nomads, haven't they just been around anyway? And it's just a moniker or term it's here. And I think that's kind of the case. And so often our clients think in terms of they think, well, I can enter the country. And so that's good enough. And so, but then there's this whole compliance regime that could come into effect once the worker enters the country, right? And so here from a standpoint, of course, there's tax issues, Social Security issues, but I think gone are the days of when the employer says, okay, you can work remotely from country C, some generic country, you're responsible for tax. Okay. And so that's gone because most countries here, not only are they imposing tax on the individual, but there are tax issues, with the employer, particularly the employer as a withholding agent, and Social Security taxes that apply not just to the employee, but also to the employer. Even on the independent contractor side, there could be withholding obligations, for their service recipient that's abroad as well. And so we have this compliance structure that's in place. The nice thing about a digital nomad visa is it kind of defines things. And so I think for years, we've had this issue of, in the US, there are lots of digital nomads, as I referenced earlier, in the United States. We just don't have a visa to capture them. Right. And so one comment that I said I would answer live was, one question was, what about what we call the B1 in lieu of H category in the United States, which is a specialized category here. It's a B visa, here. Technically, it's a B visa. And I would say to, my apologies, I couldn't pick up the name who asked the question, but my comment is that's more of a transfer in situation here, and not one where an employee is going to say, oh, I'm going to come into the United States on B1. That doesn't really happen, legitimately. That's more of an issue where somebody who's a technical person who's coming into the United States who can't qualify for our technical category of an H-1B visa, perhaps there's an avenue, with this annotated B1 in lieu of H category. So the idea here is, of course, the issue of the individuals coming in and having that compliance structure. And so that sort of provides a defined compliance structure. We can go way deep in the weeds in this. I'm going to try not to here, but you have that structure here, and then the employer can build out the compliance mechanism. And one thing that I mentioned during our prep call was transactional cost. And so it can be done. It may very well can be done. The question is how much is it going to cost the employee, the worker, and the employer service recipient to do it? And so just because it can be done doesn't mean that there are no costs attached to it, because there often are. I mean, there, as I mentioned as well, there are little Clayton Cartwrights sprinkled around the world that are willing to charge clients, in order to bring them into material compliance in these jurisdictions. And so we have to think about that as well. I don't want to say no. I just want to say that you have to account for, and I often call myself an accountant in lawyer's clothes, you have to account for the cost of doing so, and the corporate policies that are in place to manage all of that. And I think that's why you're seeing, like, Citigroup, for example, say that we're not allowing remote work here, that we want people back in the office. I think other tech companies as well have sort of pulled back a little bit as well too. It's in part probably because of the compliance costs that are in place. And so I think what we have here is ultimately we're going to have a regime of limited freedom that comes through as well. The issue here too is to think about the question of making sure that, from a corporate standpoint as well, is to make sure that you have that regime in place. I mean, the big point that when the individuals in those countries here, that you have to make sure that the employment agreements sort of cover the activities they can do. Okay. And it's not just a tax and social security question. I mean, you may have the need for insurance. You may need to have the employment council as well in those local countries. The example I brought up was what happens if the employer, yells at the employee, who's in jurisdiction Z, you've got to get this to the airport, or got to get this to FedEx out now. And then there's an accident that happens. Now in the United States, we would be all over that in terms of suing the employer. And the question is, what would be the imputed liability to the employer in that jurisdiction? So, covering these things, or you can't cover everything, but making sure that you have a managed structure in place for the employment relationship from working abroad is very important.
Yeah, that all totally makes sense. So basically it's not a no, but it's a super, please be careful. And presumably it is. So one of the questions we have here is, are tax laws going to start changing to allow for this kind of stuff? And I guess they are already, right?
They're starting to, but
yeah.
I think there's a big change coming. And the big change, I've written about the big change. The big change is that for decades, I mean, stretching back to the post-war, and I'm going to say World War II, post-war settlement, is that one is taxed based upon, in terms of income and compensation, where services are performed. So your compensation is sourced where you perform the services. Someone referred that to as your desk chair rule. Some used cruder terms to define it, but it's where you're sitting. Okay, here, but is that true anymore? Because now the workplace is being redefined. Carmo, you mentioned, the one report, the International Bar Association had a future of work report as well. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of what's happening here. But what happens in 10 years' time when you put on your virtual reality glasses and you go into an office? Okay, here, where are you performing the work? Is it in your desk chair? Is it at headquarters where you're meeting everyone else from around the world because everyone else is there? Or is it on the server? It's on the actual server. And so we don't know. And I think what's going to happen is eventually we're going to have to redefine the tax law, and to the extent that in these types of arrangements, the income is not going to be sourced where you perform the services, here where you're sitting, but actually where you're interacting and where the magic happens, which will probably be in headquarters here. So, I mean, I think you're going to start to see that. I think you're going to see the first world countries start to react, in this way to say, if you're in a remote work situation here, we're sourcing income. We're sourcing it where you're delivering. Yeah. Where you're delivering those services. And that will be a big, big change here. That will be a big change that's along the way. What never will be the law, hasn't been the law, and probably will not be the law, is someone says, well, I'm in the United States, but I'm being paid from India, so my income is sourced in India. That hasn't been the law. It's not the law and will not be the law. So for those of you who are wishing for that, not going to happen.
All right, you seem pretty sure about that.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay, so let's so we've just got about 10 minutes left, and I thought we should try and define a little bit more clearly who a digital nomad is, actually. So we talked a bit at the beginning about what is a digital nomad visa and who is it for. And, you know, I was looking at that McKinsey report about the future of work, and I thought that was pretty interesting, where it was talking about the types of job that can be done digitally, you know? So, and I think it's also interesting to see that some of these, so my little, you know, section of research, which I'll make available to everybody afterwards, by the way, many of these visas are for either employees who have their contracts outside the destination country or for freelancers, but not all of them are suitable for freelancers, you know, so there's quite a little bit, I would say a little bit of variation there. But shall we talk a bit about what we think might happen in future? So this is a bit kind of crystal ball, but it seems pretty clear that not all jobs can be done remotely anyway. So are we looking at a kind of further division or separation or distance in immigration routes between, you know, blue collar people who have to physically be somewhere and people who can just digitally be wherever they want? Does anybody want to jump in on that?
I think the similarities in the Caribbean is basically that they're not attached to an employer. They are individuals that want to move to these islands just because they want to work in a different situation. The majority of those workers are executives. It's not a person that has to be in the office to receive feedback from other colleagues. It's an executive, higher ranked, that wants to move their family to the islands or just have the experience for a year. So I think that will continue. I don't think it's going to spread to everybody that wants to go, just because of the reasons that Clayton said. What if you have to send something via FedEx, a document signed specifically with certain specification, or even a document that's very important and needs to be there on time? You can't do that from the islands. So it's basically a person, in my opinion, that's an executive that wants to have the experience and that will bring, a benefit to that specific island. At least in the Caribbean, that's what I see.
Yeah,
there's no attachment with the company. Like, you don't have to present that you work specifically for a country. It's mostly that you have the income to live there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's very related to that other subject that we talk about all the time, Fiona Mougenot's favorite subject, which is the war for talent, you know? So certainly in Europe, there is a great need for skilled individuals, and companies are, fighting over who gets to hire the best people. And I can see, not even in the future, like right now, I have clients saying, we've got this amazing person, but he or she wants to be based here. We don't have an entity there, but we still want them anyway, because we understand that they can do their job from wherever they want. Can you make this happen for us? Although there's really no sensible reason other than personal desire. And I wonder how much that kind of thing is going to escalate or increase. I think a lot,
Sophie, can I chime in? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, do.
Go ahead.
Oh,
this is something we referenced during our prep for this, right? It's bargaining power. And so there's always been bargaining power between workers and employees and employers. And so on one extreme, you have the bargaining power of the highly sought out talent, where they say, well, I don't want to move, and I want to stay here, or I want to work remotely here. And if the employer wants them long and really, really values them and wants that relationship to happen, they will pay up in terms of transactional costs to make that happen. Yeah. Okay. On the other extreme, though, you have low bargaining power by employees, and it's not really digital nomad visas, but it's really just outsourcing, right? And it's the employer saying, oh, well, we don't want to engage in, or it's too difficult to move you to the United States. And therefore you're going to work remotely for us in this country. Okay. And so it's sort of like a baby step to immigration here, that we just, you're here, we value the work, it's quality work, but not to the extent that it's
pay for you to move.
Yeah, that we're going to move you, right? And so it's the constant struggle. Maybe I'm going to be invoking Marx here. It's a constant struggle between with labor here and in the labor markets. And so yeah, exactly. And I think there's a big difference between, although like from a tax point of view, it can end up sort of in the same place, right? Like whether you're trying to hire some super duper person who thinks that they should be allowed to be wherever they want, or whether you're hiring someone who you think is good enough to do the job, but you don't want to move them, you could end up with
presumably tax issues because you've got employees who are based somewhere where you're not paying your taxes properly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the difference with the latter group, the ones that you don't want to move here, you really want to sort of spread the transactional costs out. And so you don't want to have 20 different spots. You kind of want to have them centered in one country so you can leverage the, the compliance costs against a broader base here. And again, managerial and cost question.
Yeah, exactly. So don't have one in Philippines, one in China, one in Japan, one in India, or you're going to be all over the place. Here's an amazing question. Thank you for this question, Oladayo. So this is, how easy will it be for the immigration authorities to track down individuals who are working as digital nomads? And I actually, really early on in the pandemic, I had a client come and ask, which is not really an immigration question, it's a data privacy question. They asked how legitimate would it be for them to keep track of their employees' IP addresses, where they were logging into their computers from, because we all have, I mean, actually I haven't got a digital background, this is my real house, it's amazing. But anybody can put a digital background on, anybody can pretend to be, I mean, I could be in Cape Town right now with Judith if I pretended. So I think personally that the answer is quite difficult, especially when you think about data privacy concerns. And I don't know if any of you wanted to jump in on that comment.
Yeah, that's probably a difficult one. But I think as long as we're moving into the digital space, anything and everything can be tracked. So countries will certainly keep a lid on this and will do what they can to keep control over the movement. I mean, the world is not yet at a place where we all have a digital passport and we jump on any plane we want and we arrive anywhere we want in the world and we start working. It's still limited to some people who have found the key to that, it's probably like Clayton said, who found bargaining power over something that makes them very unique. But the majority still has to, probably like us, be in an office and roll up their sleeves for many things. But the trends are interesting. So I wanted to say from the UAE's point of view, so this kind of visa came probably on the back of the COVID pandemic as well. We haven't talked about the pandemic now at all. And of course, during a time when some countries were miserably cold and ended up in lockdown, a sunny place by the beach like Dubai, which had a lot of freedom here, certainly changed a lot of equations and got a lot of people thinking, well, why don't I move over there? So the pandemic, of course, triggers so many things, digital working, remotely working as well. But so now it also affects visas. So an immigration point of view is certainly there. So immigration is affected by this and I think this kind of visa for the UAE maybe would not have been introduced without the pandemic and the pressure which it produced on a smaller economy like the UAE.
Yeah, maybe in some countries it was a direct response to what was happening in reality anyway, which then turned into a movement to try and attract more people to do the same, right?
I agree. In the islands, it was like that. A lot of people go there for maybe a couple of weeks and they're working from their hotels. And anyway, it was just kind of a way of telling those people, come for a year, stay a little bit longer, spend your money here. Maybe you'll buy a house. So it's like, it's kind of luring people in and give them the possibility of having a different experience. But I think it was kind of, what they did was make it possible, make it legal.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think, so we have another question here. This is another question from Bhagyashri, which says, he says, apart from corporate and individual tax compliance issues, there have been massive employment law issues for years. How will the visas mitigate the risk? And I guess that is, I mean, one way to mitigate the risk of something non-compliant is to facilitate a compliant route to do the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Why not? If you can then obtain tax revenues and, government tax, government kind of stamp, visa fee revenue from that as well.
Sophie, it's interesting. I mean, everyone's mentioning COVID right now. I think right now, at least I'm coming from a tax perspective, apart from the United States, everyone still considers this the era of COVID in terms of enforcement. In other words, I think there's sort of been a COVID-free pass that, a general COVID-free pass that's been given. But I don't think anyone's going to announce from the top of Mount Sinai, COVID's over, we're now enforcing. And so I imagine, things that, that weren't enforced, tax outside the United States and Social Security, that because of COVID, because of general, COVID relief that was being provided, that a lot of workers might be, in the next few years, once we emerge from the pandemic and COVID is barely behind us, they're going to say, well, why'd you do this? Well, because of COVID. It's like, well, COVID's over. And so I think you're going to see, probably a lot of workers, employees tripping on the wire in other jurisdictions, maybe so much with digital nomads, but they are with digital nomad visas, but are nomads in other countries, whether they're stranded or marooned. And they're going to mention COVID much in the same way that governments used 9/11, after the U.S. did after September 11th as a general excuse.
Yeah.
Here. So COVID, I think COVID is going to be used as an excuse. The pandemic is going to be used as an excuse probably well into 2023, 2024. And we're going to be to deal with this with our clients and say, well, it's over and it doesn't work anymore. And I don't think anybody's in the authorities are going to announce it's over, with just the relief's going to expire. And no one else is
totally right. It reminds me, there was a TV show here when I was a kid, Harry Enfield, where there's a character, it was like a sketch show. There was a character who was just drunk and rude and horrible and was always just shouting about how it was Christmas. So it would be like Christmas and he'd sort of throw up everywhere and beat his children. And then he'd be like, it's Christmas, what's your problem? And it's sort of, it's like, oh, anything goes, but it sort of feels the same, like just because, and I've been trying not to say COVID, I sort of, I'm trying to have some days where I don't say that word. It's not happened yet, but yeah, I think you're totally right that, it's sort of coming back to haunt us, I think. And I guess that is another reason to have special visa categories, which people should understand and abide by. And there isn't just a kind of get out of jail free card with COVID permanently for the foreseeable future. Yeah, one.
No, I just wanted to add that I think the digital nomad is also completely connected to the remote work, and remote work is not yet completely legislated. So in terms of tax, social security, and labor legislation, which is very important, once all those questions are answered and the legislation meets those gaps, then I think a lot of situations will be automatically sorted out for the digital nomads. And it's my personal belief that the digital nomads will work more on freelancers, because like Clayton was saying, the employment agreement done as remote work will raise so many questions. And one of the also I think would be interesting to refer in the question that somebody asked before, how would you know you're you're on remote work for the first 90 days, at least in any country? And one of the things that is completely connected to that is the social protection, because if you're there as a tourist, you will not have a social protection, and that social protection needs to be offered in the future in remote work, I think.
And what I think is really interesting as well, which we don't have time to talk about, but is the idea of these digital nomad visas or remote visas, which are a sort of smoothed out package which covers everything. It's like you can come here, come to the Bahamas, pay your fee, have your visa, stay for 12 months, your tax will be fine, your social security, we've sorted all out, there's no issue. Firstly, they can't sort out any home country issues because that's out of their control. But also secondly, if you're a person who doesn't need a visa, so say Portugal ends up with a digital nomad visa that does all of that, like imagine that would happen. And then a French person comes, or a Portuguese person who's usually based in the US or something, if you don't qualify for that visa, then you wouldn't be able to avail yourself of the other kind of, accessible things that go along with it, if you see what I mean, So it certainly seems like there's, I don't know, I think there's a few years to go before it's all completely, before the road is not bumpy. but it's an exciting place to be. Anyway, we've pretty much run out of time. We do have one more question from a mysterious anonymous attendee. Do you think it would be a good idea to conform this visa type to an age bracket and post-qualification and work experience, as well as a certain amount of money, and make it only for assignees who don't qualify for other type of work visas? Whoa, that would be quite a different direction, I think, to have it correspond to an age group and a qualification. At the moment, none of the digital nomad visas that I know of have particular qualification requirements. That it's all about the cash, really.
I think it defeats the purpose. Sorry, I mean,
I think so.
It defeats the purpose, because I mean, we're talking about the issue about maybe we should just have the category, even if you don't, it's sort of as part, not just to have it for people to access, but as part of our whole marketing, our whole nationwide marketing, attraction of talent, that we offer this as well, because it looks good here. And so you put all these conditions on the digital nomad visa, and it's kind of like a gotcha or a catch, and it doesn't, I think it defeats the purpose here,
exactly.
Which you would call,
because if you go to those, especially the Caribbean websites, they're beautiful websites, like beautifully done with beautiful pictures, and they say things all over them like it's as easy as that, and just apply here and it will take 5 working days, like the whole thing is about ease of access and user experience, really, isn't it? Which is a totally novel idea to anybody who works in the field of immigration. And that's it. I think we've run out of time. Do any of you guys would you all like to say one little final closing comment just before we close down? Judith, we haven't heard much from you, so I talk too much and I want you to say something.
I like this. That's really interesting. It's been interesting to see where we're going, where we're heading forwards, from different countries, different approaches. And yeah, so it was really nice to participate again. Like last week we had a prep call, so people don't know. So, and meeting everyone else. And yeah, I see you guys soon. Thank you.
It was a great pleasure meeting everyone. Thank you very much, Sophie, for the opportunity, and great meeting you, Clayton, Judith, Carolina, and Carmel. And let's watch the space for all developments.
For sure.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thanks everybody for all the information I've received. Now I know a little bit more right now. I'm a little bit more intelligent in the field.
This is the only reason I do these webinars, Carolina, because I know nothing about these things. I think, what should I do? How can I persuade everybody to give up their time to tell me all about it?
Great.
Well, thank you very much, you too, Sophie, for organizing, and I've learned a lot with you all. Yeah, let's see what time brings.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for organizing this. It's exciting because it's not just to share our insight here, but I feel like we're actually, writing the rules.
Right.
We're sort of having our little input and, and sort of formulating the rules as this regime comes into place. So that's exciting. So thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. So what I'm going to do, everybody who's watching, I'm actually not sure if my LinkedIn live stream worked. I think I've been, it says here it's working, but I haven't seen it pop up on LinkedIn. So I'll share the video for everybody who registered for the LinkedIn live event as well. And the other thing I'm going to do is write up my notes here in a slightly less unappealing format, and I will make those available to people on the OWL website, and I'll send it to you 5 as well, so that you have it. But yeah, that's it. We've got 2 minutes overdue. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you guys for your time and for your expertise. Brilliant. And thanks everybody for your amazing questions as well. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.